Darnell Foster was a talented black artist, but the road to recognition seemed endlessly uphill. Working from a cramped, cluttered studio in his small apartment, Darnell poured his soul into every brushstroke, attempting to make a name for himself in the highly competitive and exclusionary art world. His work was deeply personal, raw and unfiltered, and it often focused on themes of race, identity, and the struggles of marginalized communities. For Darnell, painting was more than a career choice, it was a form of protest, a way to confront the systemic injustices that plagued not only his own life but the lives of so many others in his community. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, Darnell had faced adversity from a young age. Art had been his escape, his way of processing the anger, frustration, and confusion that came from being part of a society that constantly marginalized him and his community. But despite his undeniable talent and the depth of his work, Darnell found himself continuously rejected by mainstream galleries. His paintings were often dismissed as too raw, unpolished, or too political for the high society art world that valued sophistication and tradition over authenticity and cultural relevance. Darnell's financial struggles were equally daunting. With limited resources, he often had to choose between paying for his next meal or purchasing art supplies to continue his work. Yet, through it all, he remained committed to his craft. His art was his voice, and he knew that his stories, his community's stories, deserved to be seen, heard, and respected. Still, the lack of recognition from the mainstream left him questioning whether he would ever break through. Introduction to Jonathan Caldwell, the gallery owner. Jonathan Caldwell, the owner of Caldwell Gallery, was the epitome of the elitist, old-guard art world. His gallery was a prestigious institution, known for showcasing well-established artists with pedigrees and a track record of exhibitions at the world's finest institutions. Jonathan prided himself on curating a collection of refined works, those that adhered to the traditional notions of beauty, technique, and sophistication. The gallery catered to a wealthy, upper-class clientele that valued exclusivity above all else. For Jonathan, art was not about pushing boundaries or reflecting the realities of modern life, it was about status and cultural capital. Jonathan's views on art were narrow and exclusionary. He believed that only those who had been formally trained in elite art schools and had built a resume of high-profile exhibitions were deserving of representation. The idea that artists from marginalized communities could create works of lasting value was a concept Jonathan could not fathom. To him, art from these communities was too raw, too radical, or too unrefined to belong in his gallery. He had little time for works that defied traditional aesthetics or didn't adhere to his vision of what high art should be. This gatekeeping mindset had earned Jonathan a reputation as one of the most powerful and influential figures in the art world, yet also one of the most out of touch with the artistic innovations happening outside his sphere of influence. As a result, Caldwell Gallery represented only the artists whose work fit within Jonathan's narrow definition of what was worthy of exhibition. Artists who came from backgrounds like Darnell's, those with no formal art training, no pedigree, and no connections, were completely ignored. Jonathan had no interest in breaking away from tradition. His focus was on maintaining the established norms of the art world, ensuring that only a select few artists gained the exposure and acclaim they deserved. Darnell's first encounter with Jonathan Caldwell. Determined to break through, Darnell decided to approach Caldwell Gallery, hoping that Jonathan Caldwell would see the true value of his work. Armed with a carefully prepared portfolio of his most significant pieces, Darnell approached the prestigious gallery with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. His work, filled with cultural narratives, raw emotion, and thought-provoking commentary on race and identity, was deeply personal, and he believed it had a place in the broader conversation about art and society. Darnell knew the road to recognition would be difficult, but he remained hopeful that if he could get one person, just one person, to see the potential in his art, he could finally make a name for himself. Jonathan greeted Darnell with the cool, disinterested demeanor that he had become known for in the art world. Darnell, eager for an opportunity, laid out his portfolio in front of Jonathan, presenting each piece with quiet pride. Each painting told a story of struggle, resilience, and identity, capturing the complexities of life in marginalized communities. But as Jonathan flipped through the portfolio, his expression remained unchanged, disinterested, almost indifferent. After a few moments, he placed the portfolio down, his judgment already made. "This work," Jonathan said, his tone dismissive, "is too raw. Too unrefined for a gallery like ours. We deal in serious, sophisticated art here, not this." He gestured vaguely at the pieces on the table, as though the very nature of Darnell's work made it beneath him. "This is more suited to smaller, niche galleries. We focus on established artists, people with real credentials. Art like this doesn't fit with our vision." Darnell felt the sting of Jonathan's words. His heart sank, but he refused to let the rejection break him. He had faced rejection before, and he knew that success wouldn't come easily. Yet, as he left the gallery, feeling the weight of Jonathan's dismissiveness, he quietly vowed to prove that his work, his voice, was worthy of recognition. He would build his name on his own terms, no longer relying on the approval of the gatekeepers who didn't see his value. He wasn't going to give up. The rejection wasn't the end, it was the beginning of Darnell's journey to prove that art, his art, had a place in the world. It was time to show Jonathan, and the world, that his work mattered. While Jonathan Caldwell and mainstream galleries continued to ignore Darnell, the artist's work began to find its way into more progressive and underground art circles. These spaces, unlike the elitist galleries, recognized the cultural significance of Darnell's art, its raw power, emotional depth, and its unflinching exploration of race, identity, and resilience. Darnell's work resonated with collectors and curators who valued these deeper meanings over mere aesthetics, making his pieces highly sought after in these smaller, more inclusive circles. Darnell started selling his paintings to private collectors who appreciated his unique perspective, with many seeing his work as more than just art. It was a symbol of strength, resilience, and resistance. His art was a reflection of the struggles and triumphs of marginalized communities, and it became a powerful tool for those who wanted to engage with the complexities of identity and history. His pieces began to be displayed in independent galleries that celebrated emerging voices and in underground spaces where authenticity was valued above convention. Despite the lack of recognition from mainstream institutions, Darnell's art was gaining a dedicated following. Word spread about the emotional depth and authenticity of his work, and collectors from all walks of life sought out his paintings. His art had become a symbol of empowerment and representation, and though he remained largely unknown in the broader art world, he was becoming a quietly influential figure in these alternative spaces. Darnell was slowly but surely carving out a place for himself in the art world, creating a space where his voice, and the voice of his community, could be heard. Darnell's breakthrough, auction success. Darnell's quiet success culminated in a pivotal moment when one of his key pieces, The Unseen Story, was acquired by a prestigious auction house. This painting, filled with vibrant colors and powerful symbolism, captured the African American experience in all its beauty and complexity. It told a story of struggle, resilience, and history, challenging the viewer to confront uncomfortable truths. The Unseen Story wasn't just a painting, it was a call to action, a statement of identity, and a reflection of a community's journey. When The Unseen Story was put up for auction, the bidding skyrocketed far beyond what anyone expected. The final price shattered records, and the painting became a symbol of Darnell's growing importance in the art world. The sale marked a turning point in Darnell's career, propelling him into the spotlight. The art world, which had previously ignored him, could no longer overlook the rising star who was shaking up the industry with his raw, powerful art. This breakthrough moment led to increased interest in Darnell's work. Major collectors, critics, and galleries took notice of his success, and Darnell's paintings began to be regarded as valuable, innovative, and impactful. Critics began to recognize the cultural relevance of his work, praising its emotional resonance and its ability to challenge societal norms. Darnell's art was no longer seen as a passing trend, it was being recognized for its transformative potential and its ability to redefine the art world. Despite the sudden fame and financial success, Darnell remained focused on his craft. He continued to create art that reflected the authentic stories of marginalized communities, and he refused to be consumed by the commercial aspects of his success. His art had always been about more than just making money, it was about telling the stories that needed to be heard, pushing boundaries, and creating meaningful change in the world. Gallery owners continued dismissal. Meanwhile, Jonathan Caldwell, completely unaware of the rising success of Darnell's work, continued to dismiss him as a passing fad. From his position of power, Jonathan remained convinced that the art world would quickly tire of Darnell's raw style and that his success was merely a temporary trend. Jonathan mocked the artist's rise in private, scoffing at the idea that someone like Darnell could have a lasting place in the art world. In a conversation with a fellow gallery owner, Jonathan said, "This Darnell Foster guy? He's just another flavor of the month. His art is too raw, too political. It'll fade out of the mainstream soon enough." Jonathan's inability to recognize the lasting impact of Darnell's work reflected his rigid, elitist view of art, where only certain kinds of artists, those who adhered to the old, exclusive norms, were worthy of recognition. Darnell, however, overheard Jonathan's dismissive comments. Instead of feeling defeated, Darnell felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that Jonathan's rejection and mockery were just fuel for his fire. He had worked too hard to let this dismissive attitude hold him back. Darnell's success was not a fluke, nor was it a passing trend, it was proof that his voice, and the voices of his community, had a permanent place in the art world. His work was impactful, it was valuable, and it was here to stay. Jonathan's failure to see the true potential in Darnell's work only strengthened Darnell's resolve. He had proven his worth in the auction houses, in independent galleries, and in the hearts of his collectors. Now it was time to prove to Jonathan, and to the rest of the art world, that Darnell Foster wasn't just a passing moment, he was a force that would change the landscape of art for good. Darnell Foster's name quickly became synonymous with innovation, authenticity, and cultural significance in the art world. What had started as a quiet rise in underground galleries and private collections blossomed into global recognition. Darnell's paintings, known for their powerful depictions of race, identity, and history, began to be showcased in some of the most prestigious galleries and museums worldwide. His work was no longer a niche interest, it was being hailed as a transformative force in contemporary art. Critics were quick to praise Darnell's ability to capture complex cultural narratives through a combination of modern abstraction and traditional techniques. His art wasn't just visually stunning, it was intellectually and emotionally compelling. Darnell's ability to portray the depth of the Black experience, from pain to joy, from struggle to triumph, resonated deeply with audiences across the globe. His work spoke to the challenges of marginalized communities while celebrating their strength and resilience. This recognition catapulted Darnell into the upper echelons of the art world, making him one of the most sought-after artists of his generation. As Darnell's profile grew, his paintings were selling at auction for millions of dollars. He was no longer just an artist, he had become a cultural leader. His success symbolized a new era in the art world, where diversity, inclusivity, and cultural dialogue were valued over tradition and exclusivity. Darnell was recognized not only for his exceptional talent but also for his ability to bring fresh perspectives to an art world that had long been dominated by conventional standards. He was reshaping the conversation, pushing boundaries, and inspiring a new generation of artists and collectors. Jonathan Caldwell's realization. Back at Caldwell Gallery, Jonathan Caldwell could no longer ignore the buzz surrounding Darnell Foster's work. The once dismissed artist had exploded onto the global stage, selling paintings for astronomical prices and securing high-profile exhibitions in top-tier museums. Jonathan watched helplessly as the art world, once his domain, shifted in a direction he had never anticipated. He had seen Darnell's raw talent, but his narrow, elitist views had prevented him from recognizing the potential of the artist. As Jonathan's gallery continued to struggle, unable to keep pace with the changing demands of the art world, he began to feel a deep sense of regret. His refusal to embrace emerging voices like Darnell's now seemed like a critical mistake. Darnell had become a cultural phenomenon, while Jonathan's gallery, built on outdated notions of sophistication and elitism, was quickly losing relevance. The art world that Jonathan had once helped shape was evolving, and he realized with increasing despair that he had failed to be part of that evolution. Jonathan had always prided himself on his ability to identify top-tier talent, but his failure to recognize Darnell's worth had cost him dearly. He had dismissed Darnell as too raw and unpolished, overlooking the fact that Darnell's authenticity and emotional depth were exactly what the art world needed. As Darnell's success continued to soar, Jonathan found himself trapped in his own pride, unable to admit that his outdated view of art had prevented him from seeing the true value of this rising star. Darnell's new identity. With his newfound success, Darnell no longer needed to rely on traditional galleries or institutions. He had reached a level of influence that allowed him to take full control of his career. He began bypassing the middlemen, the galleries, curators, and agents who had once dictated where and how his work was shown, and started negotiating directly with top collectors, curators, and museums. This autonomy not only gave him greater creative freedom but also allowed him to ensure that his work was being showcased in the most meaningful ways, on his own terms. Darnell also understood that his success was about more than just personal achievement, it was about making space for others. He used his platform to give back to the art community by establishing mentorship programs for emerging artists, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds. Darnell's programs provided financial support, exhibition opportunities, and valuable guidance to young artists who were struggling to gain recognition, just as he had been. His goal was to ensure that future generations of artists wouldn't face the same barriers he had. Darnell knew that the art world was changing, and he wanted to be part of making that change permanent. His rise wasn't just about fame or financial success. Darnell was reshaping the art world to be a more inclusive, diverse, and open space for creative expression. He was committed to making art a platform for cultural dialogue, a space where voices that had been silenced for too long could be heard and celebrated. By supporting emerging talent, amplifying diverse voices, and challenging the traditional standards of the art world, Darnell was ensuring that the future of art would be as bold and inclusive as the world he had always wanted to see. As Darnell Foster's influence and financial success grew, he realized that his work in reshaping the art world could extend beyond his own career. Caldwell Gallery, the institution that had once rejected him, represented a stronghold of the old, exclusionary art world, a place where only a select few artists were given the opportunity to succeed. With his growing network of investors and supporters, Darnell saw a rare opportunity. He could take control of the very gallery that had once mocked him. Quietly and strategically, Darnell began purchasing shares in Caldwell Gallery. His financial independence gave him the power to leverage his influence and secure a major stake in the gallery. With each share, his control over the institution grew, but he did so with subtlety, careful not to alarm Jonathan Caldwell, who remained focused on the gallery's traditional approach. As Caldwell Gallery's financial struggles deepened, Jonathan's once successful business became more vulnerable. The gallery's inability to adapt to the changing demands of the art world, its refusal to embrace new voices, emerging artists, and diverse perspectives, left it increasingly irrelevant. Meanwhile, Darnell's success continued to soar, and his influence within the gallery grew stronger. He began to use his position to push for changes that reflected his values of inclusivity, diversity, and cultural relevance. Darnell's vision was clear: Caldwell Gallery would no longer be a bastion of elitism and exclusivity. Instead, it would become a platform for the future of art, showcasing work that reflected the true diversity of the world. Darnell pushed for policies and practices that prioritized emerging artists, particularly those from underrepresented communities, ensuring that the gallery's exhibitions were reflective of the vibrant, multifaceted nature of contemporary art. Jonathan Caldwell's downfall. Meanwhile, Jonathan Caldwell's inability to adapt to the evolving art world became his greatest flaw. The elitist model he had built his career on was becoming less and less relevant as younger, dynamic artists like Darnell gained prominence. The traditional art world, focused on high society tastes and established pedigrees, was losing its grip on the market, while the demand for diverse and socially engaged art continued to grow. As Darnell's career reached new heights, Jonathan's business began to falter. Major collectors and institutions were turning their attention away from Caldwell Gallery, preferring to invest in artists who represented the future, rather than the past. Darnell's exhibitions were being held in top-tier museums, while Jonathan struggled to maintain relevance in an increasingly fragmented art world. The gallery, once considered a symbol of prestige, was now seen as outdated, clinging to a model that no longer fit the changing landscape of the art industry. Jonathan watched helplessly as Darnell's meteoric rise eclipsed his own. While Darnell was making millions and securing major exhibitions, Caldwell Gallery's reputation continued to erode. The future of the art world had shifted, and Jonathan, once a gatekeeper, found himself powerless in the face of the new wave of artists and collectors who were shaping the future. The weight of Jonathan's failure pressed on him. His inability to recognize Darnell's potential and embrace the changes taking place in the art world had led to the downfall of his once thriving gallery. Watching Darnell's success only deepened his sense of regret and frustration. The final confrontation. The inevitable confrontation came when Darnell, now holding a majority stake in Caldwell Gallery, called Jonathan to a meeting. Jonathan had no idea that his once proud gallery was slipping from his control. He was still operating under the illusion that he held the reins. But when Darnell entered the room and revealed the truth, Jonathan's world came crashing down. "Jonathan," Darnell began, his tone calm but firm, "I'm sure you've noticed some changes around here. What you don't know is that I now hold a majority stake in Caldwell Gallery. I own it now." Jonathan's face drained of color as the reality of the situation sank in. His gallery, the institution he had built and protected for so long, was now under Darnell's control. "I've watched your gallery struggle," Darnell continued, "and I've realized that the art world is changing. You've held on to an outdated vision of what art should be, but the world has moved on. The future of art is diverse, inclusive, and dynamic. Caldwell Gallery will reflect that vision from now on." Jonathan opened his mouth to speak, but was at a loss for words. I didn't realize." Darnell raised a hand to stop him. "I'm not interested in apologies. This isn't about what you could have done differently, it's about the future. The gallery will now prioritize emerging artists, voices that have been silenced for far too long. I'll make sure that Caldwell Gallery becomes a place for artists who reflect the world we live in today." Jonathan's eyes filled with regret as he realized how far out of touch he had been. "I didn't understand. I underestimated you, Darnell. I thought you were just a phase." Darnell met Jonathan's gaze, his voice unwavering. "I didn't need your validation. My work was never about fitting into your vision of art. It was about changing the art world on my own terms. I've done that. I'm offering you a position within the new gallery structure, but you need to understand, I'm in charge now." Jonathan, humbled and defeated, nodded slowly. He knew that Darnell's success had not just surpassed his, it had redefined what art could be. The era of Caldwell Gallery's elitist approach was over. Darnell extended a hand to Jonathan. "You can stay and help shape the gallery's future, but understand this, the art world has changed. And I'm leading it." Jonathan looked at Darnell's outstretched hand for a moment before shaking it. The world had moved on, and Jonathan's grip on it had slipped away. But now, in this moment, he realized that change could still be a part of his future, too. Under Darnell Foster's leadership, Caldwell Gallery underwent a radical transformation. Once a bastion of exclusivity and elitism, it evolved into a vibrant hub for emerging artists, particularly those from marginalized communities. The gallery became a space where creative freedom was celebrated, where cultural dialogue flourished, and where artistic experimentation was not only welcomed but encouraged. Darnell's vision of art as a vehicle for social change and self-expression became the guiding principle of the gallery's new direction. With a keen understanding of the challenges young artists faced, Darnell implemented mentorship programs that provided opportunities to emerging talent, opportunities that had once been denied to him. These programs offered young artists financial support, access to gallery exhibitions, and invaluable advice from seasoned professionals. Darnell's commitment to elevating the next generation of artists ensured that Caldwell Gallery became a launchpad for those whose voices had been excluded from the traditional art world. As the gallery grew in prominence, it reshaped the conversation around art. No longer confined to the traditional norms of what art should be, Caldwell Gallery now showcased works that reflected the diversity of the world. The gallery's exhibitions covered a wide range of themes: race, identity, gender, and social justice, and these topics became central to the narrative of the contemporary art world. Through Darnell's leadership, Caldwell Gallery emerged as an influential institution that reshaped the landscape of the art world, ensuring that it remained a space for self-expression, cultural transformation, and inclusivity. Reflection on the journey. One evening, standing in front of an exhibition celebrating the works of young, emerging artists, Darnell Foster paused to reflect on his remarkable journey. He thought back to the days when his art was dismissed as too raw and unpolished, when he struggled to make a name for himself in a world that seemed determined to keep him at the margins. The journey had been long and difficult, but in the end, Darnell realized that his success was never just about personal achievement. It was about creating space for others to succeed, to have their voices heard, and to challenge the barriers that had been placed before them. Darnell's story was a testament to resilience and vision. His rise from a struggling artist to an influential gallery owner proved that anyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, could break through barriers and achieve greatness. He had proven that success in the art world wasn't just about having the right connections or meeting the right standards. It was about being true to your vision, staying persistent, and believing in the power of art to change society. Through his work, Darnell had shown that art was not just about creating beautiful objects, it was about creating a space for reflection, dialogue, and change. As he looked around the gallery, Darnell felt a profound sense of accomplishment. His work had not only transformed his own life, but had also created opportunities for others. He had paved the way for artists who had once been excluded from the art world's most prestigious spaces. For Darnell, the journey wasn't just about personal success, it was about shifting the cultural narrative and proving that art had the power to challenge, inspire, and transform. Darnell's lasting impact. Darnell's legacy was not defined only by his paintings, though they remained some of the most sought-after and impactful works of contemporary art. His true legacy lay in the lasting changes he had made in the art world. Through Caldwell Gallery, his mentorship programs, and his own groundbreaking work, Darnell had not only reshaped the gallery scene but had also influenced the broader cultural conversation about art. He had shown the world that art could reflect the true diversity of society and that success could come from challenging the status quo. The gallery had become a place where artists from all backgrounds could thrive, where their work could be celebrated for its authenticity, depth, and cultural relevance. Darnell's mentorship programs continued to inspire generations of artists, providing them with the resources and support to navigate the often difficult world of art and culture. His commitment to diversity and inclusion ensured that the art world remained a space where voices that had been silenced for too long could finally be heard. Darnell's story was a powerful reminder that art, like society, could be transformed when people dared to fight for what they believed in. He had proven that anyone with the courage to challenge traditional norms, to create art that reflected the world as it truly was, could make a lasting impact. Through his work and his leadership, Darnell had ensured that the art world would never again be defined by exclusion and elitism but by creativity, authenticity, and inclusivity. Darnell Foster had not just changed the art world, he had helped shape a more inclusive, diverse, and open space for future generations of artists to explore and express themselves. His impact would be felt for years to come, as new voices continued to rise and challenge the boundaries of art, just as he had done.